He is a former Navy officer, prosecutor, Northeast Florida lawmaker, and Speaker of the House. Now, Paul Renner believes he has the political chops to make a legitimate bid for governor in 2026. We ask him what his path to victory looks like. He also takes your calls and questions. You can reach us at 904-549-2937 or email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Paul Renner, thanks for being here.
Great to be with you, Ann.
So I have heard in other interviews, I've heard you reference your two young children frequently when you're asked why you're running to become Florida's next governor. You had kids relatively late. How has being a dad impacted your politics?
Well, first of all, it's wonderful. It's the best thing is being a dad. I've got a 5-year-old daughter, 3-year-old son, and it does give you a longer term horizon and motivate you. And in this case, has motivated me back into offering myself for public service. At age 23, I was in the military, 2 wars, and 20 years later, in a state attorney, fighting for the country, fighting for the community. And then, of course, joined the legislature in 2015 and was speaker as of 2024. But my kids make me think a lot about 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. And in our term limited world, it's really important that our leaders be thinking down the road at things that they can do or that they must do today that they'll never get credit for. But unless it's done today, we'll see our infrastructure degrade, our environment degrade, things of that nature that have to be done now to put us in a good place 20 years from now.
Yeah, and so you may not get credit, you may get blame, and I think that there's some people that look at the current state, for instance, of infrastructure in Florida when it comes to things like being a resilient community, being prepared for the impacts of a warming climate, and say, wow, we didn't do much in 2015 to make sure that 2025 is hardened against some of those threats or prepared for the next 50 years when it comes to reducing emissions of carbon and other pollutants that are helping to warm the climate.
Well, I'm proud to say that we did while I was speaker, and my partner, Kathleen Pasadomo, Senate president, we looked at the Indian Gaming Compact, which will soon be about $1 billion a year. It's not quite that today, of recurring revenue that's available that we didn't have before, based on that their ability to do some gaming and whatnot across the state. And so we got together and said, let's make this all part of the environment, and let's make sure that we're funding things like resilience. There's $100 million of recurring money for resilience funding for local governments to do things to avoid flooding, to raise pump stations, do the things that are necessary to make that adjustment. Sadly, the legislature this last year pulled all that out and put it in the general revenue. As governor, when I'm governor, we'll put that back in. We will, I promise you, invest in our environmental infrastructure as well as our roads, bridges, ports, and that kind of thing that we need for a growing state. I was also, along with my partner in the Senate, a champion for the Florida Wildlife Corridor, and I think it's very important that we preserve the wild Florida, not just for the wildlife, but for our environment. We need to make sure that our rain is captured and recharges our aquifer. It doesn't just run out to sea or run across the pavement into the stormwater systems, which overwhelm those systems. And so I want to be very thoughtful and forward-looking about what happens 30 or 40 years from now. And that means we set aside some of this land. We do invest in resilience and flooding issues, as well as we had about $500 million in water grants in that package that would fund local governments who can't really afford that on their own to improve stormwater, wastewater, improve their capacity. This is a very, very important thing, so we're not having raw sewage, for example, spill into our water bodies. In Florida, I'm a big believer in the fact that people come here for the fishing, for the great outdoors, for the beaches. We've got to keep it that way, and with a growing population, it's a challenge. I want people to be able to go out in the St. Johns River here in Jacksonville and catch a fish and eat that fish safely.
Yeah.
And we have to make sure we're keeping on top of those issues.
You don't have any problem saying climate change.
I don't have any problem saying that whatever is happening, and I want to look at the science. I think there's a wide variety, and what I've said is, you tell me, is it 6 inches or 6 feet? Because there's a really big difference between those two in terms of what you do.
You're talking about sea level rise?
Yeah. And so what is it? I'm agnostic. I want to know what the science shows it is. As a low-lying peninsula, if there's sea level rise, we have to adjust to that.
I mean, the science right now, even the conservative science, says that a lot of your coastline in the area, that you have represented is going to be gone, from Mayport down to Palm Coast. I mean, that a lot of the people that live in those beaches communities in 50 years are going to be seeing daily flooding, rainy day, sunny day, high tide, kind of regularly, streets underwater, infrastructure not working because of it.
Yeah, and I don't want us to get off on a debate about the debate of whether it's catastrophic or whether there's an effect. But if there's an effect, we've got to respond to it, and that's where I say I'm agnostic. If there's more flooding in Miami, for example, I was down there last week, and I think there probably is. We whether that's from development or whatever the case may be, or sea level rise, we have to have a response for it. And so we did that in the legislature. We're doing lidar, which is a very sophisticated way to bring science to the conversation and look at where those hot spots are. Because again, if sea levels are going to rise 6 inches, you can plan for that. You can make adjustments for that. If it's 6 feet, if those who proclaim catastrophe are right, well, that's a whole different conversation about relocating most of the population of Florida. I don't believe that's going to happen. But I'm not saying and discounting that we have an effect. If there's flooding, there's flooding, and we have to adjust to it, and we've done that in the legislature, I'm proud to say.
We're talking to Paul Renner. He is one of the GOP candidates for governor in 2026, and you are welcome to join our conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. We have a call from Tom on the west side. Good morning, Tom. Go ahead.
Good morning to you all, too. My question is this. What sets him apart from the other candidates, and if he's elected, will he maintain the status quo, or is he going to have his own direction?
Tom, thanks. I mean, we should say you've got some stiff competition in Byron Donalds. He has declared for governor. He has been endorsed by the president, Donald Trump. There's this potential other candidate in Casey DeSantis, who is not currently running, but her name has certainly been bandied about. Um, and I want to say, there was some local polling that we did here. We had the head of the UNF poll, Public Opinion Research Lab, on Tuesday morning talking about the poll that they did. He did not include you in that poll. And when we asked him why, this is what he had to say. Let's take a listen.
Former Speaker of the House has raised a fair chunk of money.
But you didn't include him in this poll.
We didn't include him in this poll, and one was because it's not a Republican primary. So we're doing head-to-heads in the midterm elections. We can't include all of them because it's just too much. So we went with the two folks most likely to be at the top of the polls for the Republican primary, who were Casey DeSantis and Byron Donalds.
So I don't want to lose track of Tom's question, but I mean, it can't feel great not to be included in that poll because he doesn't think that you're polling high enough to be included in it.
Well, that's their call. Look, I mean, there was another poll that showed me beating the Democrat nominee, Congressman Donalds beating the Democrat nominee. I think most polls you're going to take are going to show generic Republican over generic Democrat. And so I know where I am, and I know that we're building momentum each and every day. And to Tom's question, Tom, the difference really that's not a close call is on leadership. This is a big leadership position. You want somebody that's got leadership experience and also has proven that they can deliver positive results. And so my background is one of service to the country, 20 years in the military, served in 2 wars. Here in Jacksonville, Operation Desert Storm, I was on the USS McInerney out at Mayport. 20 years later, I led a team that was fighting against foreign fighters coming into Afghanistan to kill Americans, to disrupt those networks. And I learned about the important veteran values, one of which is you don't quit on the mission and you make sure that you focus on the mission, not the ego, the pettiness, the politics. And I believe that's why I had 2 of the most successful and consequential 2 years as Speaker of the House legislatively. And I mentioned some of the things we did. We did a lot of great conservative reforms, too. If you're a conservative and you love the free state of Florida, you'll love Governor Renner. And to Tom's question, there will be differences. There's still more to do. We have to continue to look at affordability. Insurance is too high. Property taxes are too high. I want to get after that. Higher education reform is something, in K-12 reform, we need to continue to do. We have 40% of our students who don't read on grade level in the 3rd grade. That is morally unacceptable. And I mentioned infrastructure as another area. I would also say I was recently endorsed by Stand for Health Freedom for MAHA agenda. I want to see kids not being bombarded by ultra-processed foods. I want to make sure we live long and healthy lives. And I think that means we get more towards the whole foods. The closer we get to what's coming off the farm that goes to our plate, the better. A good night's sleep is important. Making sure that we're not defaulting to a drug response to everything we do. There's a lot of healthy options and healthy providers out there that can give us some alternatives. And I want to explore that. I want to make sure we're doing things that that look at a healthy lifestyle.
What about vaccines? I mean, that's obviously been a big issue here in Florida. Our own Surgeon General saying he wants to remove vaccine mandates for children. I know that you have said, you kind of support vaccines in certain cases like polio and measles, and perhaps not as much so on, I guess, what you consider somewhat lesser concerns, things like rotavirus. My question about vaccines really is, I mean, the idea behind vaccines is creating a shield for the community, sort of doing it of yourself, not just to protect yourself, your child, but to make sure that it doesn't spread and kill people who are vulnerable, who are infants who are too young to get vaccinated, who are people who are going through chemotherapy.
Yeah. So look, the question is whether it's the CDC and your pediatrician making the decision, or you and your pediatrician making the decision for your kids. And many countries in Europe don't have mandates, and that's the question: is whether we have to have a mandate. To me, a mandate's like saying, you don't have an eggs, you don't have a choice. Basically, is what it's saying. And
Well,
I think
there
if
are exemptions people take advantage of.
there are, but those exemptions have some limitations. And so I think it's this: give people full information, the cost and the benefits. And as I've said publicly, if it's something, in my own children's case, if it's something that's going to kill them, and I see the benefit of vaccines, and I do believe they've had benefit, my kids are going to get that vaccine. If it's
What if it's going to kill
well,
somebody else, though? I mean, what
well,
if it's
hold on. If it's a COVID vaccine, people were out. The CDC's out promoting, mandatory vaccines for 2-year-olds. That's outrageous because it didn't affect 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in the way it did elderly people,
but they're
people with
conduits.
comorbidities.
They're conduits to spread disease, so they may not get it, but
Well,
they could spread it to
yeah,
your elderly
I,
relative.
I'm not on board with everything the CDC comes out with, that we have a mandate to inject my kid with that vaccine. The other thing that needs to be said, Ann, is when I was younger, I'm older than you, I'm sure, but when I was younger, you had 10 vaccines, the ones that kill you, right? And now there's 50, 60, 70 that keep being put on this mandatory list. And so kids are getting more vaccines earlier in time. That alone has some question marks about whether that can cause a higher incidence of vaccine injuries. Vaccine injuries are not hypothetical, they're real. And so this is a conversation I want to have. Now, I think when you sit down with your pediatrician and you weigh the costs and benefits, many parents, if not most parents, are going to opt to have a vaccine. But if it's rotavirus, for example, where your child's going to recover, maybe I'm not going to have that vaccine because it's not something that's going to kill my kid. They're going to, like, my kids have been sick this week. They've had a fever. They're going to build immunity. They're going to go back to school better and stronger than ever. That's part of growing up, and that's part of us building our own immunity. And I just don't think that this plethora of vaccines, some of which are not for things that will put you in the hospital, need to be mandated for parents.
Want to take some calls here. Sally in Springfield. Sally, go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. This is a new thing that I've just been hearing about and wondering about. But what are your thoughts or opinion on those new large data centers that are getting built in different states? My understanding is that they raise the electricity bill for the people around them. They use a lot of water. It's basically for AI, I believe. And Florida, from what I read, is considering putting a data center in our state somewhere. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I'll put aside the question of whether AI is good or not. That's a big, longer debate. But the question of data centers, you're right in that they generate a ton of demand on energy, which in turn can lead to subsidy by we the people, by the ratepayers. And I don't want to see that happen. And it has happened in other states. And so the problem here is capacity, our energy capacity. I support the president's efforts to look at a all of the above type of energy, whether it's fossil fuels or solar or natural gas, nuclear, you name it, whatever it is, to make sure that we have a robust energy sector that has sufficient capacity. And if we had sufficient capacity, hypothetically, I don't have an objection to it. But right now, I don't want to see data centers come in and jack up the rates of Floridians. And so that's where I come down on it. I think we need to build our capacity first before we have anything that's going to take up that much energy here in Florida.
Got a call from Brad in Jacksonville Beach. Good morning, Brad. Go ahead, please.
Candidate Renner, I believe during your time in Florida's public office, there was a bill that passed that limited local control of short-term rentals. As I remember during the time, I even think your area, Palm Coast, was kept out of that or exempt from it. Can you better explain why something that I don't think is good for Jack's Beach and you didn't think was good for Palm Coast was passed, and why we took that local authority away?
Well, I think the bill you're talking about actually gave more local authority, and so the question there is with people that had a grandfather right, and so we wanted to grandfather cities or counties that had already addressed this issue, but the bill itself would have actually given a little bit more local control. It was a priority of the Senate president. I come down. I don't come down on the middle of a lot of things. I'm usually pretty black and white on where I stand on things. On this one, I think there's two principles. One is private property and doing whatever you want with your private property to rent out your home. But on the other side is keeping communities cohesive, keeping them, not destroying a community that many people retire and they, in the case of Palm Coast, move into a community that is all of their life savings to spend their retirement years. And then next thing you know, there's a frat party next door. And there was a lot of really horrible stories. And this was during the crash, and I think people were desperate to pay their mortgages. But I think there needs to be some reasonable regulation. And so I kind of come down on the middle of this, that and this county, in this case, in Flagler County, has a pretty good ordinance that regulates that already. And so the idea was for those that did not have that to give them some additional control over what they could do with respect to regulating their vacation rentals.
We've got a call from Alfred in Jacksonville. Good morning. Go ahead, Alfred. Alfred, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was asking about the schools, the charter schools that are coming into the state and taking over some of the public schools, supposedly unused state, and it's taking away money from the public schools. What's his thoughts on that?
Well, thank you for the question. Charter schools actually are public schools, and so they receive taxpayer money. The difference is really in the lack of a union control. There's no collective bargaining with a charter school, so they can hire and fire teachers based on their performance as one big difference. And if you look at the other difference, and I would recommend Thomas Sowell, the economist, who talks about a building in New York City where you have both a traditional public school and a charter school, and the performance on every outcome measure that you'd care about is better in the charter schools, I think, because they have that flexibility. I know that because they have that flexibility. And so I'm a proponent of charter schools. We've seen their growth because this is the way it should be. Every business has an entrance and an exit, but in the monopoly of education, historically, your kid can go in, but they can't leave. It's like the Hotel California. And so if public schools are doing a great job, more people will want to enter and fewer people will want to exit. But everybody ought to have a right to exit. And that's true for private schools, charter schools. If your child is not getting what they need, you ought to have the right to send your kid to a school that best suits their needs. Many times that's a charter school, which again is a public school. And we have many great ones here in Jacksonville.
One of the issues regarding charter schools here lately has been concern about this co-location that has allowed this expansion of schools for Hope. And, here in Duval County, there is one single operator out of South Florida that's looking to either take over or come into more than 24 of the traditional public schools in Duval County. There's a fair amount of concern from some people that that's going to further deplete the local school districts' financial resources, that they're going to be, kind of losing that money to charter schools, that per pupil funding, but be required on some level perhaps to provide and share in the facilities that they, operate, whether it's busing or cafeteria or janitorial skills, that they're going to be paying for this and losing money at the same time.
Well, let me speak broadly. I'm a public school kid. I graduated from Terry Parker High School here. My mom was a public school teacher, so I am not against our public schools. I want every kid at every school to have a world-class education, period. However, we don't, and in the case of a restaurant that has a long waiting list, we would assume that's a pretty good restaurant. And if it's empty, we don't come in and say, let's subsidize the restaurant that can't, bring people in the door because it's just not performing well. The same thing with our schools, and our kids are so much more important. Again, every business has an entrance, but also an exit. And so if schools are performing well, and we have many public schools that are performing well, kids want to be there. Parents want their kids to be there. If they're not, we shouldn't force them to stay there because we call them public schools. We should have public education where the money follows the student. And if they want to go to a traditional public school, that's great. If they want to go to a charter school, which is a public school or a private school or a home school, That's great. And the great thing about the Universal School Choice Scholarship that I was a champion for is it allows for innovation. A homeschool kid could go to a traditional public school one day a week in a physics class because of the equipment that they have. And so there's an opportunity for our public schools to fill some of that capacity with kids that have never been in public schools for a day or two, if that's what the parent wants to do and if that makes sense for both sides. And so this is a question about excellence. This is a question about allowing money to flow where excellence flows. And if we're doing things right and leading to better outcomes, we should get behind that. And we should not get behind systems that fail us and that allow for almost 40% of our students in third grade to not read on grade level. And as governor, I will get after that problem. And that's not a shot at our public schools. I want to see what we need to do to make that happen. It's a long process, but we've got to demand excellence from every school.
We've got a call from, or excuse me, we've got a message from Jason in Avondale. He says, during his time in the House, Paul was a champion for medical billing transparency. However, he's been highly critical of the Affordable Care Act and the Democrats' line in the sand regarding the government shutdown. He has consistently said that the Affordable Care Act should be abolished and that those decisions should be put back in the states. Since he's running for governor, I'm interested to know what his plan is for lowering premiums and offering affordable health care insurance, especially for small business owners like myself. I currently do not have health insurance because I cannot afford it.
So let's talk about the Affordable Care Act, which is poorly named. And if you remember, we were told prices are going to go down, costs are going to go down, you'll keep your doctor. None of those things happen. And so you can ask your friend ChatGPT about it, but healthcare costs, whether it's premiums, deductibles, have gone up more than inflation, have gone up more than our wages. And this is the same issue we have with property taxes. It has outstripped people's ability to afford it. It's become the Unaffordable Care Act. And why, in part, is it requires a bunch of things that most of us don't need. And there's arguments that are made on the left-hand side of the political spectrum as to why that should be. But I'll give you an example that's simple. I had to buy my wife and I had to buy a oven unit, and it comes with some things that we wouldn't necessarily want. We have these extra features that we may never use, but we have to pay for them. Obamacare does the same with its regulations. For example, I'm paying for maternity care. Probably don't need that. And so you can argue whether that's good or bad, but what it's done is it's made everyone's policies more expensive over time. And as I said, it has not brought down costs, it's increased them. So I want to see state-centric care. I would like to see the Medicaid program, which is a federal state match, brought to the state level. We're doing a good job through Medicaid managed care where people, we're holding down the line on cost, but also have happier customers on the other side of that program. He mentioned transparency. I do believe in full transparency for price. You can go get an MRI, same MRI machine here in Jacksonville, and the price may vary widely based on where you park your car because there's just not transparency in that price. And so I had a bill that he's probably referring to that says, let's let the patient share in that savings. If they can go to the same MRI machine, it's nothing about quality, it's the same machine, that one place charges X and the other place charges X plus 20%, you save that 20%, you ought to put some of that in your pocket or allow you to deduct that off of your premiums or your deductibles in a fashion where you get some of the savings. We have a system where patients pay what they're told, they go where they're told, they have no incentive whatsoever to shop their care in a non-emergency setting. Obviously, you can't do that in an ambulance, but where it's something that you can schedule like a hip surgery, again, wide variety in the cost of a hip surgery in the state of Florida. If we empower patients through transparency, through shared savings, it's one way we can bring down the cost of care. And again, bringing it to the state level, we can be more responsive, drive down costs while still maintaining good access and good quality.
We've got a call from Crystal in St. Augustine. Crystal, go ahead, please.
Yes, with the recent increase in funds that charter schools and private schools are getting from the state, what is your plan for holding them accountable for providing the services for ESE students and students with disabilities that they are guaranteed to receive in public schools?
So everybody that receives the scholarship has to take an end-of-year exam so we know whether they're progressing as a public school kid would. But with respect to special needs, you mentioned ESE, but I'll tell you that it's been a game changer for children with autism. There's a school that is built as a result of the scholarship that gives parents who could not otherwise afford it a school that is specifically designed for children with autism. You can have the same thing with a micro school for children that have dyslexia or some other disability, and this is really, really important. Our public schools do the best job they can, but they're not built for, you can't have a one size fits all for some students. And so I want to make sure that we have an educational system that is innovative, that meets the need of each child as an individual. We know even brothers and sisters learn differently. And so what school choice will do, as I mentioned earlier, is it will allow a flow not just out of traditional public schools, but also in traditional public schools if they're meeting the need. The bottom line is if you meet the needs of parents and students, money should flow to you. If you're not meeting that need, it should flow away from you. Again, an entrance and an exit into a business. If I don't like what I see at Chevy, I can go across the street to Ford. And that's how education ought to work as well, so that wherever we find innovators, and you can find them in a public school, and teachers that are innovators that are really delivering on education in whatever capacity that is, students will flow that way. And we want to make sure we empower that.
Well, Paul Renner, a good conversation. We hope to have you back during the course of the campaign. Once again, Paul Renner running for governor in 2026. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Ann. It's great to be with you.